There is a specific kind of grief that nobody talks about at funerals or acknowledges with casseroles left on doorsteps. It doesn't announce itself with black clothing or a burial date. It arrives quietly month after month in the form of a single line on a pregnancy test when you were desperately praying for two. Elena and Marcus Osei had been trying for 4 years. 4 years of ovulation, kits lined up like soldiers on the bathroom counter. 4 years of Marcus learning to give injections into Elena's hip without flinching, even when she cried. 4 years of fertility specialists speaking in percentages. A 30% chance, perhaps 40% with this protocol, as if love and longing could be reduced to statistics on a whiteboard. They had met in the most unremarkable way possible, a broken umbrella during a rainstorm outside a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon. Marcus had offered her half of his, and Elena had laughed because half an umbrella in a sideways Oregon downpour was arguably worse than no umbrella at all. They stood there getting soaked anyway, and neither of them moved, and that was that. They married 3 years later in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard. Elena wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. Marcus cried before she even reached him at the altar, and he never apologized for it, not once. They talked about children the way most young couples do, casually, with the breezy confidence of people who assume the universe is fundamentally on their side. 2, maybe 3, Elena had said once, her head resting on Marcus's chest in the dark. A house loud enough that you can't hear yourself think. Marcus had kissed the top of her head. Deal. But the universe, it turned out, had other plans. The first miscarriage happened at 9 weeks. The second at 11. The third, the one that broke something essential in both of them, came at 14 weeks, when they had already told their families, already downloaded a name app, already argued lightly over whether Sophia was too popular. Elena was in the grocery store, reaching for a box of pasta, when she felt it. She stood in that aisle for a long time before she could make herself walk to her car. After that, Marcus would sometimes find her standing at the kitchen window late at night, not looking at anything, just standing. He never asked what she was thinking. He already knew. He was thinking it too. Is this our life now? Just the two of us, forever reaching toward something that keeps disappearing? The answer, they decided together one quiet Sunday morning over cold coffee and a stack of medical pamphlets, was no. No, they would find another way. Surrogacy was not a word they arrived at easily. Elena had complicated feelings about it, feelings she was almost ashamed of, because they seemed ungrateful and irrational even as she felt them. She worried about what it meant for the child. She worried about bonding. She worried, in her most private moments, that a baby grown in someone else's body would somehow know, would carry some cellular memory of absence that no amount of love could fill. But Marcus was patient with her fears the way he had always been patient with her, not by dismissing them, but by sitting inside them with her until they lost their sharpest edges. The love starts now, he told her one evening. Right now, while we're sitting here scared, that's already parenting. Elena looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the pamphlet again. They found their surrogate through an agency in Seattle. Her name was Diane, 34, a kindergarten teacher, mother of 2 boys who were currently destroying a living room somewhere in suburban Tacoma. She had warm brown eyes and a laugh that arrived without warning, and she told them at their first meeting that she had done this once before for her college roommate, and it had been, quote, the most meaningful thing I have ever done with my body besides growing my own kids. Elena cried in the car on the way home, not from sadness this time. The embryo transfer worked on the first attempt. Diane called them at 7 in the morning, and Elena answered before the first ring had finished, and when Diane said, "So, we're pregnant," Marcus, who had been pretending to be asleep beside her, sat straight up like he'd been electrocuted. The 9 months that followed were the happiest of their lives. They painted the nursery 3 times, not because anything was wrong, but because they kept finding better shades of the same gentle yellow, each one more perfectly right than the last. Marcus assembled a crib in 3 hours and then dismantled it and reassembled it because he wasn't sure the 5th screw was tight enough. Elena made a playlist for the baby, classical pieces, soft jazz, a Frank Ocean song she couldn't explain but felt strongly about. They They went to every appointment with Diane, every single one. They watched their daughter move on the ultrasound screen, a flickering, impossible collection of heartbeat and shadow, and Alina gripped Marcus's hand so hard his knuckles went white, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say. They named her Amanda. It meant worthy of love. They booked a baby moon, a week in coastal Maine before they brought Amanda home. One last quiet week together before the beautiful chaos began. Their flights were booked. Their bags were nearly packed. Diane's due date was August 14th. They planned to be back by August 20th. Diane's labor began at 6:42 in the morning on August 12th, 2 days early, which the midwife said was perfectly normal, nothing to worry about. She called Alina's number first. It rang 7 times and went to voicemail. She called Marcus's number. Same. She called both again from the hospital bed while the contractions were still manageable, assuming they were in the air, assuming they'd land and find her messages and come rushing and flushed and breathless and apologetic, the way people do when life almost makes them miss the most important moment. Amanda Grace Osei was born at 2:17 in the afternoon. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair, eyes so unusually light, a kind of amber gray, that the delivery nurse commented on them twice. She was, without question, the most beautiful thing Diane had ever seen. And Diane had done this before, had felt the cocktail of emotions that came with handing over a baby she'd carried, but always known was not hers. She had prepared for the bittersweet. She had not prepared for this. For the empty room. For the missing parents. For the silence on both phones that stretched from 1 hour into the next, and then into the evening, and then into the following day, hardening from concern into fear. By the 3rd day, Diane had called the agency in a panic. The agency called the Osei family's listed emergency contacts, Alina's mother, Paulette, who arrived at the hospital with shaking hands and wild eyes, and confirmed what everyone was beginning to suspect. Nobody had heard from them. Their house was locked, their car was in the driveway, their mail was piling up. 2 people had walked out of their lives, and into silence so complete it felt deliberate. The missing persons case was filed on August 17th. The story made local news, intended parents missing as surrogate gives birth, and the comment sections filled quickly with the particular cruelty that internet strangers reserve for stories they don't understand. People had theories. People always have theories. Diane sat in the hospital for 6 days before it became clear that nobody was coming. She sat beside that bassinet and looked at Amanda, at those strange, lovely amber eyes, and felt something she hadn't expected. She felt furious. She felt heartbroken. She felt protective in a way that scared her because she had a contract and a family and 2 boys at home who needed their mother back. And Amanda looked up at nothing in particular and blinked, and Diane thought, "You have no idea what has happened to your world. You have no idea that you were supposed to go home by now." Paulette, Alina's mother, who had driven 12 hours and arrived without sleeping, sat in a chair by the window and pressed her fist to her mouth and did not speak for a very long time. Eventually, she looked at Diane. "I'll take her," she said. "Whatever it takes, I'll take her." They found Marcus's rental car 4 weeks later. A logging road in rural Maine, not far from the coast. The car had gone through a guardrail in the dark, the kind of guardrail that lines mountain roads more as a formality than a promise. It had rained the night of August 9th, and the road had been slick, and the investigators pieced together what the evidence suggested. A tire losing traction on a curve, a skid, a silence. Marcus Osei was found. He had not survived the crash. Alina was not found in the car. Alina was found 11 days later by a paramedic named Gretchen responding to a report of a disoriented woman walking along a coastal highway, barefoot, in a man's jacket that didn't belong to her. She had a severe head injury, 3 broken ribs. She had been alive somehow for weeks, sheltered by whom or what was never fully established. A hiker's unlocked cabin, they suspected. Canned food. Survival instinct working below the level of conscious thought. She could not tell them her name. She could not tell them where she was from, or who the man in the photos on the phone they recovered nearby was, or why she had been on that road, or what she had been driving toward. The brain, when injured badly enough, does not always delete in orderly ways. It doesn't erase like a whiteboard, clean and complete. It erases the way water erases sand, unevenly, in patterns that follow the path of least resistance, leaving strange islands intact while consuming everything around them. Elena Osei remembered how to read. She remembered how to drive. She remembered, inexplicably, the words to a Joni Mitchell song she'd loved at 17. She remembered that autumn was her favorite season. She did not remember Marcus. She did not remember 4 years of grief and hope and love and yellow nursery paint. She did not remember a baby named Amanda, or the way she'd felt watching a tiny heartbeat on a screen, or the promise she had made to herself that this child would always know she was wanted. She was discharged into a rehabilitation facility under a name the staff gave her informally, Jane, while investigators worked to match her to the missing persons report. The connection was made 6 weeks later. Paulette flew to Maine. She sat across from her daughter in a white-walled room and watched Elena look at her with polite, pleasant confusion, and Paulette, who had survived things she never discussed, immigration, poverty, the death of her husband at 51, reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. Elena didn't pull away. But she didn't remember either. Paulette brought Amanda home to Atlanta. She filed for guardianship. She learned, at 63, to puree sweet potato and manage a sleep regression, and explain to a baby who could not yet understand why there was no mother and no father coming through the door. She did this with a quiet ferocity that her church friends called strength, and that Paulette herself called something simpler. What else would I do? Elena, who now went by Ellie, a name the rehab counselors used because Elena triggered visible distress for reasons nobody could explain, was eventually placed in assisted living in Portland, Maine. She had partial independence. She had a social worker named Brent who brought her coffee on Tuesdays. She had a library card and a window that looked out on a small garden and no memory of the life she had been building. She got a teaching certification. She had always been drawn to young children. She didn't know why. She just felt most herself in rooms full of them, felt her chest loosen and her breathing slow in ways that nothing else produced. She completed her coursework at a small community college and applied for a teaching position. She was hired at Riverside Elementary in the fall. She taught kindergarten. She noticed the girl on the 3rd day of school. This was not unusual in itself. Teachers notice children. That's the whole job. But this was a different kind of noticing. This was the feeling of recognition arriving without its source, like hearing a song you know but cannot name. The girl was 5 years old. Her name on the roll sheet was Amanda Osei Carter. She had been enrolled by her great-grandmother, listed on the forms as primary guardian. She had dark hair that her great-grandmother had put in 2 braids, and a small, serious face that broke occasionally into a grin of such unguarded joy that it briefly stopped whatever you were doing. And her eyes. Her eyes were that particular amber gray, unusual, arresting, that made you look twice and then a 3rd time. Ellie looked at those eyes on the 1st day and felt something shift inside her chest. Not pain exactly, not joy. Something in between, something nameless, like the feeling of standing at the edge of a very large body of water. Where have I seen those eyes? She thought about it driving home. She thought about it making dinner, standing at the stove, a spatula in her hand and her mind elsewhere. She thought about it in the 10 minutes before sleep that she had come to recognize as her most honest time, the window when the careful, managed version of herself relaxed its grip. Those eyes. She mentioned it to Brent, her social worker, who had been working with her for 3 years now and had become something between professional support and genuine friendship. She mentioned it casually, almost apologetically. I know this sounds strange, but one of my students, the way she looked at me. Brent set down his coffee. Tell me more. Ellie tried to explain it and couldn't, not properly. She said it felt like looking in a mirror and not quite recognizing yourself. She said it felt like a word on the tip of her tongue that she couldn't reach. She said after a long pause, "I feel like I know her, and I know that's not possible. I've never met her before in my life." Brent said nothing for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "Ellie, can I ask you something?" Something in his tone made her go still. It took Brent 2 days to make the calls. He had always known in the broad strokes what Ellie's file said: missing persons, accident, memory loss. He had never pushed into the specifics because recovery from the kind of trauma Ellie had experienced was not a process that benefited from forcing open locked doors. The mind closes certain rooms for reasons. But the name on that enrollment form, Osai, the same last name in Ellie's file. He sat with that for longer than he should have, because he was a careful man and a kind one, and he understood that what happened next would either be nothing, a coincidence, a different family, or it would be something that changed the shape of everything. He called the agency. He called Paulette Carter. Paulette picked up on the second ring. When Brent explained who he was and what he was asking, there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that he checked to see if the call had dropped. Then Paulette said very quietly, "She's alive." It was not a question. Paulette drove 18 hours straight. She called her pastor from the road at 2 a.m. and talked for an hour and then drove the rest in silence. She arrived at Brent's office looking like someone who had just walked out of a fire, not burned, but changed. She sat in the chair across from Brent and said, "Before I see her, I need to know, does she know anything? Does she know about Amanda?" No, Brent told her. Ellie had no idea. Paulette nodded slowly. Brent watched her hands in her lap still, deliberate. "Then let it happen naturally," she said. "Don't tell her who Amanda is before they've had a chance. I want to see if she knows. I need to see if some part of her already knows." Brent thought about this for a long time. "That's either the wisest thing I've heard in this job," he said finally, "or the most dangerous." Paulette looked at him. "Welcome to my whole life." The day Paulette came to the school, she sat in Ellie's classroom during afternoon free play. She sat in a small chair at a small table and watched her daughter move through the room. The way she crouched to a child's eye level, the way she laughed, the way she pushed her hair back from her face in a gesture so familiar it was like a fist to Paulette's chest. And she watched Amanda. Amanda, who had never been told much about her parents beyond, "Your mama and daddy loved you very much, and they had to go away." The gentle, incomplete truth that Paulette had been carefully managing for 5 years. Amanda moved through the classroom with the comfortable ease of a child who felt safe. At one point, she walked up to Ellie to show her a drawing. Ellie crouched down and looked at it. "Oh, this is beautiful. Who is this?" "That's my grandma," Amanda said. "And that's me, and that's a dog." "You have a dog?" "No," Amanda looked at her very seriously, "but I'm working on it." Ellie laughed, that full, unguarded laugh. And in that moment, Paulette turned to face the window because she could not manage her face. She doesn't know. She doesn't know, and she already loves that child. She already loves her, and she doesn't know why. After the children were dismissed, Paulette stayed. Ellie noticed her then, this older woman, beautifully dressed, sitting very still in the corner of the emptied classroom. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize, can I help you?" Paulette stood up. Her hands were shaking. She had prepared words. She had driven 18 hours assembling them into sentences, and now every single one of them had left her. She said the only thing that was true. "Sweetheart, my name is Paulette, and I'm your mother." The silence that followed lasted 5 seconds, maybe 10. Ellie stared at her. "I am sorry I don't." "I know you don't." Paulette's voice was steady now, the shaking moved inward. "I know you don't remember me. I know you don't remember any of it. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say all of it before you say anything back." Ellie sat down on the edge of a child's desk, slowly. Paulette told her. She told her about Marcus, about the boy who had cried at the altar, who had reassembled a crib at midnight, who had given injections without flinching. She told her about 4 years of trying, and the 3 miscarriages and the way Alina had stood at the kitchen window in the dark. She told her about Diane, and the embryo transfer, and the morning the phone rang at 7 a.m. She told her about yellow paint and a Frank Ocean song and a name that meant worthy of love. And then she told her about Maine. And then she told her about Amanda. Ellie had gone very white. "The little girl," she said, her voice was barely sound. "In my class." "Yes." "Amanda." "Yes." Ellie put her hands over her face. What happened next was not dramatic in the way you might expect. It was not a flood of recovered memory, a cinematic restoration of everything lost. The brain does not work that way, and Ellie's brain least of all. What happened was smaller and larger at the same time. She cried, for a very long time. For Marcus, mostly. For a man she could not remember but whose absence she would spend years learning to grieve in reverse, mourning someone she had to meet through photographs and her mother's stories, and the shape of her own love for him, which existed somewhere below memory, in the place the water hadn't reached. And then she asked quietly, "Does she know? Does Amanda know?" "Not yet," Paulette said. "I thought you should be there." Ellie wiped her face. She looked at her hands. She looked at her mother, this woman she didn't remember but whose presence felt like standing near a fire after a long time in the cold. "Those eyes," she said softly. "I've been looking at those eyes for 3 weeks and I couldn't figure out why I knew them." Paulette sat down beside her. "She has yours," she said simply. "She has always had yours. Memory is not the same thing as love." This is what Ellie told the therapist she started seeing in October, as she navigated the staggering complexity of building a relationship with a 5-year-old who was biologically her daughter and emotionally a stranger, while also grieving a husband whose face she could only find in photographs, while also learning, slowly, imperfectly, who Alina had been and deciding which parts of her to reclaim. "I don't remember loving Marcus," she said once, "but I feel the absence of him. Is that the same thing?" The therapist said she thought, yes, in its way it was. Amanda was told the truth in a way appropriate for a 5-year-old, which is to say, in pieces, gently, with Paulette present and a stuffed rabbit that Amanda gripped through the harder moments. She was told that Ms. Ellie was her mama, that her mama had been sick and lost some of her memories, that she hadn't been gone because she wanted to be. Amanda listened to all of this very seriously. Then she asked if Ms. Ellie would still be her teacher. Yes, Paulette told her. For now, yes. Amanda nodded, apparently satisfied. "She's good at the craft part," she said, with the authority of someone who has strong feelings about the craft part. There were hard days, many of them. There were court proceedings and custody arrangements and grief counselors and conversations that left both Ellie and Paulette hollowed out and exhausted. There were days Ellie sat in the yellow-painted nursery that Paulette had photographed and showed her, looking at images of a room she didn't remember building, and felt the loss of herself so acutely it was nearly physical. But there were also mornings. Mornings when Amanda climbed onto the couch beside her and handed her a book and said, "Read this one," with no ceremony and total confidence, the complete confidence of a small person who has decided that you are safe. Mornings when Ellie read, and Amanda leaned against her arm, and outside the window the autumn came in the way autumn does, all at once, suddenly, the whole world changing color. Ellie had always known autumn was her favorite season. She still didn't know why. But sitting there with Amanda's small warm weight against her side and the trees going gold beyond the glass, she thought that perhaps it didn't matter. Perhaps some things lived below the waterline, below memory, below language, below everything the injury had taken. Perhaps some things were simply hers, waiting patiently in the dark for her to find her way back. She turned the page. "Again," Amanda said immediately. Ellie laughed. "Okay," she said, "again." For anyone who has ever loved something so completely that even forgetting couldn't undo it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more amazing stories like this one. Tell us where you are watching from. Like, share, and drop your thoughts below. See you in the next one.